This is Gray.
This is Mel.
This is Liz.
And this is Chris.
We want to welcome Chris Fedak to the podcast, episode 105 of Chuck versus the Podcast. This is actually our second last podcast, and it's a great privilege to have Chris with us. How you doing, Chris?
I'm doing fine. Thank you so much for having me, guys.
Yeah, and it is amazing to think, actually, it's as we're recording this, it's over a month has passed since the Chuck finale, and yet it still feels so fresh. I remember our finale party here in Toronto, and it's definitely a testimony or a testament to how awesome those last couple episodes were. But we have so many questions. We had 700 questions submitted for this podcast, and we don't have time to ask them all, but we're going to get right to it, and Mel's got the first ones.
Okay.
5 minutes.
No! Since I kind of got thrown under the bus on this one, but I did it on purpose. Since I'm the one that heard the most about the finale from the fans. So I get to ask you the really tough one. Okay. So, we do the annual fan survey after the season's over. And we ask people, what did you think about the finale and the final episode? And the majority liked the finale. And the majority actually liked the last scene, but there was a significant chunk that said that the last scene was too ambiguous for them, where they were disappointed not to see the dream house and the baby and the living happily ever after. So I kind of, those were the bulk of the questions that we received had to do with that. So I kind of compiled them into what I'm pretty sure the fans would ask if they got to sit here in my chair.
Sure.
So,
absolutely.
All right. So first of all, what made you decide to end on the kiss instead of, for example, a flash forward or Sarah saying, I remember? What were you trying to convey with that last 30 seconds?
Oh, I think I love the idea of Chuck and Sarah falling in love again. I love the idea that in some ways, in Chuck tradition, that our finales are also in some ways a preface for a future story. And Chuck and Sarah has always been a love story. And the Chuck Show has always, in some ways, at the heart of it, been a love story. And we felt that there was something incredibly kind of moving and about the idea of Chuck and Sarah falling in love again. And that idea of them, Sarah, that we set up pretty firmly that those memories are in there. That there's deep down, there's Sarah's past is floating around. But we also love the idea of them kind of falling in love again. So that's where that's why we ended on the kiss, and we ended on the promise of the kiss. And I think that that's something that we knew we were going to do pretty early on. And I think that was much more satisfying than simply going to, the aha moment of Sarah remembering. I love endings that imply more story. And I know Chuck and Sarah, even though they won't be on NBC Fridays at 8 p.m. or Mondays at 8 p.m., they will in some ways have a great new future in front of them. And that's something that I like to imagine, think about. So I think that moment from the get-go, even when we pitched NBC at the end of last season, we were heading toward that moment. We were heading to this story. And I think that it was also, for me, when you look at those last 3 episodes and you see where, we set up early in the season what the Intersect does to a person's brain. We set up with Morgan, the memory loss component. And then when we brought Sarah into it and we went down that rabbit hole of her losing her memories, I think that a simple kind of snap moment would have undercut a lot of the good and great work, and also a lot of the amazing performance that Yvonne brought to that, as well as Zach in those final moments. I think that it's amazing when you have a show, when you're able to take the biggest thing in the show, the stakes of the show, into the very last few frames of the finale. And that was something that we wanted to do, and So that's the long-winded Fedak answer, but it was designed that way.
So you never even considered doing a flash forward to show them in the future?
No, I considered everything. I mean, listen, the other thing, too, is that when the Chuck writers, Josh and I and everybody who's worked on the show, we're total nerds. So when we knew that we were heading toward our finale, and this would be the final moment of the show, the stakes were daunting because we really felt that we had to do something special, and it had to feel different from what we had done in the past, but it also had to be emotional, and we knew that it would fold down to what was the core of the show. It was the Chuck-Sarah relationship. What if he doesn't get the girl? And for me, when I talked to Zach and Yvonne on set, it's like we realized it's like there was what was the thing that could not go well? What was the thing from the very beginning of the show of the guy getting the girl? And the guy got the girl in season 3. But what happens if he doesn't get the girl? What if we open up that question again? And so for us, that was the biggest thing, because there was probably, any pitch where Chuck and Sarah die at the end, or Sarah dies at the end, or Chuck dies at the end, or someone, or it's some other kind of, type of finale. That wasn't really the stakes of the show. The stakes of the show were this relationship. This was the biggest piece of the puzzle that we could address and deal with. And so we wanted to tell that story. We wanted to fold everything back to Chuck and Sarah and making the relationship and, using the Intersect like we had done with Morgan earlier in the season was the way to do it.
So the first 11 episodes of the season, we saw Chuck and Sarah were frequently talking about and making decisions about leaving the spy business, about buying their dream house, about having children. And then we don't actually see any of that happen in the finale. So were those supposed to be clues for what was going on?
I think that, what those were set up for was the scene from, the penultimate episode, the first hour of the finale, where it's essentially Chuck has learned all of these secrets about Sarah's life, the house with the red door, the picket fence, and so much about her life that's where we were heading. We were heading to the point that he would know so much about her that he could sit her down and say, you've told me all these things. It couldn't have been simply a mission. And so that from a structural perspective, like setup and, that it was building to that moment, to that speech from Chuck that Zach and Yvonne just destroyed. I mean,
oh my gosh.
Emotionally, it's a riveting scene. And the episode was written by Judkins and LaFranc. And it was, it's an amazing moment in the show. And so that's very much the seasonal, kind of the B-side to that setup. I mean, going forward, like, what you imagine the future of Sarah and Chuck doing, it's like those are also things that, they may find themselves, heading toward and doing. And, it's a big, exciting future for them.
Do you have an image in your mind of what happened after we faded to black?
No, I'm not telling you what I think happened after we faded to black. I wouldn't do that. Come on, no.
Well, see, I think a lot of what the discontent among the fandom is, and again, this isn't everybody, but it is a significant number of people, is that they don't feel like they got real closure. And there are those of us, and I think all three of us on the podcast are on record saying we wanted to be able to imagine our own future for them. So we really liked that. But there are others who say, you know what? I don't have a good imagination. I needed it to be shown. I needed them to say this is what was going to happen.
Yeah, I need to just cut in because I know I've seen this on Twitter. We're not insulting anybody's imagination.
No, they've come right out and said, I don't have a good imagination. I needed to see it.
I think we knew pretty early on we weren't going to do a flash forward. Because I also don't know what a flash forward is really, for us and the story that we were telling, that it feels like that we would simply be trying to answer, just kind of, we would be checking off that they're fine and they lived happily ever after. And that was that type of ending, which is a totally cool and legitimate ending for another show. I think that for us, Chuck and Sarah kissing at the very end and, fading to black and knowing that, it's the beginning of closure is much cooler and much more evocative and much more, much more of a heavy moment than simply saying everything's fine and there's an epilogue and that's it. That's not what we wanted to do. Mm-hmm. No.
Yeah. Well, I thought it was a beautiful way to end it, but I felt like I had to bring that up because there are still those that
sure.
Yeah, a month later they're saying I just can't move on. I feel like I just can't get past this. And to me, that says, so that was some good writing right there. That was some good storytelling. If it's still with you, it's still.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. It's like, I think, for me, and what made the Chuck-Sarah relationship so important, such an important part about the show from a big perspective from the entire thing. And it was something that the writers and Yvonne and Zach and everybody who worked on the show is that it made people passionate. People had a passionate feeling one way or the other. So from the writer's room where we would yell and scream and argue to, Zach and Yvonne and how they figured out how they would address their performances and how they would, build that relationship that people were passionate about it. And so for fans who, for 5 years, they felt strongly about it and felt strongly about which way we would take something, the negative and the positive. I feel like that was the show working. I think that was, I would much rather our fans had been passionate, even when they thought we were going the wrong way, than nobody caring. And I think that I couldn't imagine that, which is like, it's a big, type experience, type feeling. I think it was much more exciting to work on a show where, there was that spark, and that spark that we could see as we were working on the pilot between Zach and Yvonne.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, man. Their performances in those last 2 episodes amazing. They've given powerful performances before, but those were just spectacular.
They let out all the stops. It was we were blown away when we were watching them perform it, and as well as in Edit Bay, and we got together with we did cast and crew screening right before the episode aired, and it was, everyone was blown away by what they brought to those scenes in those 2 episodes, and just the epic emotion, because I think that we learn in television is, it's not the movies. We don't have $100 million per episode, but I have actors who belong in a $100 million movie. And so we knew, it's like, and thinking about that final scene on the beach, we knew we could do a beach, and Zach and Yvonne and them in close up and them kissing was going to be magic in our version of Chuck magic. That's a stupid term. Please don't use the term Chuck magic.
Oh, I see fan fiction being written right now titled Chuck Magic. Oh, all right. Well, I think we've exhausted that topic, so we have more, and I know you have limited time, so.
Well, let's move on to Decker and Quinn. Liz, do you want to take these ones?
Sure. Well, Anthony Connors, he wrote and asked a question during the final scene of during the finale of season 4, Chuck versus the Cliffhanger. Clyde Decker had stated that everything that had happened to Team Bartowski had all been part of a much larger plan. Season 5 seemed to take this into another direction and never really revealed such a grand scheme. Were there initially other ideas involving this? And if so, what were they?
Were there other ideas? Sure. I think that by the time that we got around to, in the first half of the season, when we got to the notion of the plan being the designs of Brandon Routh and Shaw's Revenge, we knew that we had to structurally do that, because it was, we had to answer what the plan was, because we wanted to then transition the season with episode 7 with episode 8 to being about Sarah and Chuck and the second half of the season. So there was other talk of like what the plan was. There was talk quite a bit about we wanted to come back to Jordana Brewster at some point. But when we started looking at the fact that with the ratings that we were going to only have 13 episodes, that's where we began to make where the plan which we always imagined would have a Shaw component to it, that's when we boiled it down to Daniel manipulating Decker and being the person behind the plan.
Mm. Okay, well, Jason wants to know, was it the plan to bring Quinn in for the final 4 episodes all along? It almost seems like Shaw was to play a larger role from all the setup of the first half of season 5. Was it an actor availability issue with Mr. Routh?
No, not at all. We wanted to close off the Shaw story at the beginning of the season. You know, in season 3, when we had Daniel come back at the second half of the season, that seemed fun and clever, and it was cool to bring him back to life and have Brandon play a bad guy, because Brandon as a bad guy is amazing. When
yes.
He's a great muhaha, and I loved him in the part. But I think that when we were looking at this season, to do the same move, you know, bring him back and then bring him back again, I think that would have been a little too much. But the episode 7 with him and Sarah in the cold is just an outrageously cool episode. And what our production team was able to do with that episode was just super neat, and the intensity was incredible. So no, we always knew that we were going to bring in a new bad guy in the last couple of episodes of the show, that we would create another person.
Mm-hmm. Well, John from Sweden wants to know, how long had Nicholas Quinn been plotting against Chuck?
I think Quinn is, you know, it's like when I was thinking about parallel courses, that, you know, it's like Quinn's been working in the spy world for quite some time. I think that after season 4, that, you know, you can imagine that Quinn had set his sights on Chuck Bartowski, and you can kind of see him slowly but surely. You know, if we go back in time and do the backwards math with his encounter with Morgan during the Frosted Tips phase, that he was narrowing in on Carmichael Industries and Chuck Bartowski.
So had he been working like for 5 years to figure out who had the Intersect?
No.
Okay.
When it comes to Quinn, I mean, Quinn's backstory is that he was originally going to get the Intersect, that he was the guy who was selected for it. However, you know, what happened was he didn't get it, and then his career was ruined because he was captured on the mission, and it's kind of set him spiraling toward the dark side, if you will. But he's also been kind of the opposite of Carmichael Industries in the past 4 years, watching his client base, Fulcrum, The Ring, Volkov Industries, disappear because of this very small operation. And that brings Quinn back to Chuck Bartowski. We, you know, one of the things about the Chuck show is that we always have longer cuts of each episode. And Quinn actually had quite a few monologues that unfortunately weren't able to make it into the show, just because, like, you know, it was always the challenge of the show to kind of, you know, get all of the good spy stuff as well as the good comedy stuff, and sometimes a bit of his backstory fell out.
Cool.
Are you going to put that on like the complete series Blu-ray edition?
You mean the one that's coming out soon?
No, like all 5 seasons together. Can you expand all of the episodes for us? Can you get on it? I know you have free time now.
It would be kind of impossible. Sometimes, like, those long versions of the show were just incredibly long. You know, they were just they would have felt different and kind of out of character with the show if we had released, the version that's 10 minutes over, 8 minutes over. So I would say that, you know, if you look at the show, there was usually a version that was maybe a minute or two over, that allowed us to do everything and to kind of milk everything that we wanted to do and have every joke that we wanted to do. That would be cool to have that version, but it just doesn't exist. It's like the show is always in a kind of a fluid place when we're working on the cuts, and they only really existed as computer files. Now, for the finale, we do have a long version of the finale that'll be on the DVD, which was something that really neat and something we always kind of wanted to do. And so there'll be some really cool extra moments that we weren't able to include in the finale.
Cool.
Awesome.
And moving on, we're going to do some questions about the Intersect. Linus.
Oh boy.
Linus asks, is the DARPA Intersect the only information-only Intersect, or the Intersect 2.0 information and abilities Intersect? Because Chuck's last flash didn't have the traditional kaleidoscopic tunnel effect that 2.0 had.
My feeling was that it was a new version of the Intersect, so that would have put it in keeping with, having abilities in there as well. Mm-hmm. But in that final flash, Chuck's having an informational flash. It wasn't like we were sitting and saying he couldn't, it wasn't an ability flash. It was more like, this is like an old-fashioned flash. This is one with simply information in it.
Okay, so we can call it a 3.0, and that was just the 1.0 compatible flash.
Sure.
Okay.
I'm certain if we got out the flow chart, which I've put away, guys, we would realize that there was 14 different intersects, and this would have been 14.2. But it wasn't. The fact that he flashed on information doesn't mean that there weren't abilities.
Okay.
Were you serious? There's 14 different versions of the Intersect?
I'm being half serious, which is how I usually handle things.
Because I didn't count that high when I was tracking them.
No, sweet Lord.
And Brian Barker asks, I would very much like to know which version of the Intersect Chuck uploaded to himself in the finale. Okay, yeah, sorry. We basically just answered that. He wants to know if he knows Kung Fu, and I guess we established that he does.
Yes, I would say he does.
Cool. And Edric asks, in the finale episode, Chuck gets the Intersect again to defuse the bomb. I was wondering, does he still... Oh, okay, so, some of these are repeating. Anthony asks, it was always implied that Chuck was unique and one of the only people who could handle having an Intersect without repercussion. However, in the 5th season, it seemed like anyone could handle being or having an Intersect as long as it did not have a bug or a virus. Why is that, and did that change?
Well, I think that when you look at, the people that had the Intersect in them outside of Chuck, and just using the 3 examples of Shaw, Sarah, and Morgan, it really did not help those people were not well served by having the computer inside their head. Shaw, if anything, was bent on revenge, and for Sarah and Morgan, it wiped their memories, and there certainly was a flaw inside the Intersect, but I don't think when I look at it that Morgan and Sarah were that it was that the Intersect was fantastic for them. That Sarah did great, but she burned out. And also, even look at Chuck. It's like Chuck was able to keep the Intersect in his head for quite some time, but in season 3, he needed the governor. The governor. Thank you. I was about to say the inhibitor, and I was like, no, that's not it, Fedak. You have something different. The governor. So I think the Intersect, and this is something that when we started working on the season of the show, that we were really kind of interested in the idea of what if the Intersect's not a good thing, in regard to what it does to people, and especially if it becomes, using the example of the Lord of the Rings, if it's the Ring of Power, and it's this thing that affects people in such a way that it's fascinating to watch what happens to Morgan and what happens to Sarah. But I think that Chuck is special, and I think in the end it's he's the one person that can handle both. Our Frodo, if you will.
Yeah.
And since we had some duplicated questions, I'm going to throw in one of my own. What was the significance of Chuck's early accidental flash when he was a kid?
I think that what it was the beta. This is a very early version of his father's Intersect technology, and I think that when you think about it, it was there was no information and there was no spy intel inside of it, but it's something that should have hurt his son. It's something that if Chuck had looked at those screens and had that Stephen J. Bartowski, when he rushes into that room and sees his son, he thinks he's just cooked his brain. That Chuck's not okay. And when he realizes that he's okay and he was able to, survive it, he's kind of, we're kind of setting up that there's something special about Chuck, that there's something, he's got a big old brain and he can handle this futuristic technology. But, that was kind of an answer to our first 2 seasons of the show. Why was Chuck so great with this? And also the idea that maybe this technology wasn't perfect for James Bond. Not that James isn't smart, but it was perfect for a guy who's a bit more of a nerd.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Mel, do you want to take the next section?
Yeah. Speaking of nerds, Chris T from Toronto wrote in and he said, Chuck the character really hits close to home for me. Just like him, I'm a proud video game and techie nerd. I used to work at a major electronics store, and also, just like Chuck, I somehow got the girl. He says the similarities go further, but I digress. He says, I know having an everyman become a spy was always part of the original concept, but why a nerdy everyman? And how much did Zach's personality influence that character?
Well, Zach's personality definitely influenced it. It was a big deal. I mean, I think that when we worked on the pilot, we wrote the script, but not knowing that Zach would play the part. But like when you saw him on set, playing video games with Morgan at the CompUSA where we shot the pilot, in the middle of the night, Gomez and Levi, playing video games, but you realize that he was going to have an incredible influence on the show as well as the kind of the reality of it. I was about to use verisimilitude, but I always trip over that word. But that he was going to speak to that, and that he was going to inform that character in a big way. It's funny, when Josh and I first sat down to talk about the show, I think it was very soon after we started talking about it, the idea of like the regular guy, is that we came up with the idea of the Best Buy, that the Best Buy and the Geek Squad concept. And that we would create this thing called the Buy More, and that he would be, the head of the nerd herd. And that seemed like just like a fun, colorful world, because it's just, when you think about TV and you're thinking about like what sets you want to see and worlds you want to go to, we hadn't seen a show really set in one of those big box stores. And we thought it would be a fun and colorful world. And that's why we that Chuck became that guy. And also seemed to fit in really well with, this is a day and age where, every man, and woman, we're all geeks to one extent or another, because, we have all these apps on our phone, and we have, little computers that follow us everywhere. So I think that the everyman of it all is that the everyman is heading more toward the geek than the geek is toward the everyman. And that was, and then Reaper came out. So we had two big box store shows. So that was great.
Well, we know who won that.
Oh, it's not a winning thing. I actually am a big fan of Reaper.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Well, in the context of character development, how did you approach Chuck's progression to adulthood? This is a question from Glenn K. And I think what he's meaning is, did you kind of map it out ahead of time of like these milestones that you were going to have him hit?
I think that we pretty much worked off of Zach's hairstyle, No, but listen, it was one of those things that early on Zach was like, so when do I get to shoot somebody? I was like, never. And he was like, what? And that was each step along the way. We were like, this is the show. Isn't the show about the guy who becomes Jack Bauer in episode 3? It's about the guy who becomes Jack Bauer, actually shoots somebody in episode 13 of season 3. And I think that was always going to be a big part, is that we were going to slowly step through the progress of Chuck, kind of manning up, because this show was always going to be, it was a quarter-life crisis show to begin with back 5 years ago when people were using that term. But, we wanted to watch that process kind of like step by step. So all along the way, we wanted to see each moment was going to be a big deal, from, Chuck shooting somebody from the first time, going on his first, or even going back, boiling it down even further, to going on his first spy mission, being in peril for the first time, it's like being taken by the bad guys, and also this Chuck-Sarah relationship. So for us, we were in some ways going, let's milk every one of these moments and see, because that's what life's like. It's like these are all big moments, and we didn't want to jump past anything to the first kill, because that would be, we'd be missing something, and we'd also be changing the character too quickly. But I also think that, the amazing thing about Zach's performance, as well as everybody that worked on the show, but Zach specifically, is to watch that the guy who's on the beach at the end of the show is not the same guy who was from the pilot. He's matured, and the fact that what he says to Sarah is he's just going to be there. He mans up in an amazing way, and it's not a moment of like daring do in action or anything along those lines. It's him emotionally telling the woman that he loves that no matter what, he'll be there for her, however she needs him.
I think you're a romantic at heart, Chris.
Oh, I'm total romantic at heart. It's funny. It's been a discovery. It's like when we first started working on the show, I think that we love the big explosions and comedy and stuff like that. But I think that the revelation of the show is it's a love story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. Liz, do you want to take the next section?
Yeah. Speaking of love story, everybody's got a love affair going on with Sarah. And we had a lot of questions, people wanting to know, upset fans who feel that the amnesia storyline erased 5 years of character development for Sarah. Do you agree with that interpretation of the last 2 episodes?
Oh, by no stretch. No, I don't think so. I think that, well, the 2 things. One, I think that, I think we, like I said before, we hinted the fact that, there's drips of her memories coming back. And 2, that she's changed in quite a big way, so that the Sarah who's on that beach in that moment with Chuck and he's telling her their story is a different person than the Sarah Walker from 5 years ago, as well as the Sarah Walker from the beginning of the penultimate episode. And that was something that, we Chuck versus Sarah, we wanted to push that. So there's like wrenching moments throughout that episode that we really wanted to kind of like, to push their relationship and to see how far, Sarah would go, when she thinks that Chuck's the bad guy. So that was but I don't think that, it's 5 years of character development, lost and, lost in those last few episodes. I do think, and for me, it was one of those, like, when we watched the show and we watched the cuts, I look at it differently because I know where we're going. It's like, we kind of address it that way. And for me, the moment when the train splits apart, and Nicholas Wooten's episode, the Chuck versus the Bullet Train, when the train splits apart and Sarah's in the wrong car and she's looking out, and that moment of her looking at through the window and Chuck looking through the window and the train splitting apart is a huge moment. And it felt epic to me because I knew that we were not going to simply give our characters an easy out. That this was an epic moment between Chuck and Sarah, the Chuck and Sarah of who they are and what they've built. So I think that the stakes are very real. And for me, it's one of my favorite moments in the season, just because I think that when you watch it again, you see like this is so much bigger than some of even the death scenes that we've done in the show. It reminds me of one of the moments I have a hard time watching, and had a hard time watching when we were working on it, which is the death of Stephen J. Bartowski. Mm-hmm. So I do understand when fans say they feel like that wrenching anxiety and about Sarah. It's like, yes, that's what we intended to do. That's the emotion that we were going for. But I do feel that the hopeful finale and the hopeful ending that of that beach scene doesn't fully answer and doesn't fully, give you the 4 years after, Chuck, Sarah, and the baby at the house. But it's the beginning, it's the germ, it's the spark of hope going back to the pilot.
Well, I think if you think of Sarah from the pilot, or even from the end of season 2 when they were on another beach, that Sarah, if Chuck said, "I love you and I'll be here for you," she would have run. And this Sarah didn't. And that seemed to me like a really critical point as far as, those people that were saying this is, pre-season 1 Sarah. I don't think so.
Exactly. Do you think Sarah Walker would, it's like, it's an inversion of the pilot scene. But do you think Sarah Walker would have even asked Chuck for the story? It's like, we knew that tension was something that was going to be at the heart of that final episode. That Sarah would in some ways be resisting the idea that Chuck has all the emotional answers. But by the moment she asked to tell me the story, she's saying that emotionally she's beginning to feel this connection. And I think that moment in that final kiss is it's the more important part of it. It's not the fact that she remembers everything. It's the fact that she feels it. And she feels, she feels this moment, and she's asking for Chuck to kiss her. And I think, and to hear the story. And for us, that emotional memory, was the aha moment.
Mm-hmm. That was my aha moment.
It was. I totally got it.
It was amazing to watch those guys do it. But yeah, absolutely.
Divine from the Philippines says she wants to know, at what point during the life of the series did you realize that the Sarah Walker character had as much, if not more, of a compelling character arc and journey as Chuck Bartowski? And were you surprised about how the audience responded to her?
No, I think I wasn't surprised by how people responded to her, because, we knew we had something pretty special in Yvonne and what she was going to do with the part as we were even watching the pilot being filmed. I think that for the in season 2, we meet her father for the first time. And I think that we just began to really enjoy that character because she was the opposite of Chuck in some ways, that she had come from this very kind of exciting, big blockbuster world, genre world of spies and whatnot. And so for us, it was a fun thing to take that character and explore her much like we were exploring Chuck. If Chuck's Peter Parker being pulled into a much bigger world, or Luke Skywalker being pulled into a much bigger world, Sarah was already there. And I wanted to, I and the rest of the writers, we wanted to see why she was the way she was. And so for us, it was a fascinating character to explore, and I think that Yvonne was an amazing actress to write to. She could convey so much simply with just with her looks and also imagine she's the same girl, by which I mean woman from the beach scene is the blonde female monster from Phase 3.
Speaking of,
I do. One of my favorite writer moments is like we all loved writing all the characters. Some people had their passions. Kristen Newman had passion, Kristen Newman and Ellie, and I think Lauren LaFranc, and especially we're very passionate about Sarah. And I remember we were getting notes from our executive at Warner Brothers about one of the Sarah stories we had come with, and the executive was very excited. She's like, I'm just so, Sarah's so fascinating. This is such a great character. And Lauren LaFranc was sitting across, and she just kind of whispered to herself. Everybody could hear. It's just like, yeah, she's the best. Sarah's the best. And it was like that's the kind of like almost like every once in a while our show would kind of tap into like the shows we loved as kids. And I think that LaFranc kind of spoke what we were all thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Dwayne wants to know if you can give a specific example of something Yvonne contributed that originally did not come from the writer's room, if anything.
Oh, interesting. Oh, I have to think about that for a second. Something that didn't come from the writer's room that Yvonne contributed. Well, in some ways, it's like there's a give and take when you're working on a show between your cast and your writers that you want to make yourself available to, because the actors are living with these roles. So it's always a conversation as we're kind of talking about things and seeing where what the actors are excited about. We like to think about those things as well. I do remember that it was absolutely, we definitely had to bring the Cat Squad back in the finale of season 4. Yvonne, pretty much necessitated that. So, but we talk about everything. Every part of the show was a conversation. So I'm certain there was tons of stuff that she brought to the character even before we came up with it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, Christy has something rather lengthy.
Oh boy.
Yeah, she says, I'm a huge fan of the Sarah-centric episodes. They're among my favorites. But over the years, I think there have been some inconsistencies or confusion regarding her CIA timeline. Could you map out how things unfolded?
No, I'm not mapping anything out.
You're done with maps.
I have a timeline in front of me of Sarah Walker's career. I have Langston Graham's file on Sarah Walker. I mean, I can try to put something together. I have to think of it, but I'm. What's just the question? I didn't mean to jump in there.
I'm trying to read ahead here.
If it's a matter of 7 days, I'm not going to be able to analyze that. No. I don't have her entire.
No. From being recruited by Graham and changing her name, then recruited out of her. It's a big timeline.
Mm-hmm.
It is a big. Well, the Sarah Walker timeline is a rather epic timeline, considering the fact that she was recruited from high school by Graham, went to work for the CIA, and then I guess without my flow chart, which I've hidden away somewhere, I would I'm not quite certain what the discrepancy is.
I'm not sure either, because I think she's kind of got it lined out, because she says recruited by Graham, changes her name, joins Cat Squad. is partnered with Bryce. Bryce goes rogue, so she has to go with Riker, and that situation happens in Prague, and then she severs ties with her mom, and then the next day she's assigned the Burbank mission.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. Christy, you already had it.
I already had it. Done. Answer. Question answered.
Cool.
Okay.
Well, we're gonna have to move probably a little more quickly, and we don't want to give short shrift to Casey, but Judy from Toronto has some questions about Casey. Casey evolved into a real father figure as the show went on. Was that planned from the beginning? And did Adam Baldwin play a role in its evolution, and McKenna Melvin as well?
It was planned that we wanted to see these characters become more human. That we wanted to see them we wanted to see Sarah and Casey kind of put more into the world of everyday people, and see them become in some ways like fuller, richer kind of people because of the Chuck mission. Did we know exactly that we were going to go down the road of the father story? No. Not from the get-go. But as we kind of got into it in season 3 and we started working on our Casey backstory, that's where the father side of the story went. And that, we knew that, that we wanted to set up the idea that he had this relationship. And that, once we realized that there was a daughter, that was something that, we thought was going to be an incredibly poignant moment in an episode that would most likely be one of the middle episodes in our final season. But then we got more episodes. So what that meant is that we had to go back and look at that episode where we meet, Casey and we learn about his backstory, and that he has a daughter, and we had to look at McKenna Melvin. And this is one of those moments when you're working on a TV show where it's like McKenna had one line in that episode, and we were nervous. It's like, let's bring her back in so she can read for this much more expanded part that we kind of designed for our penultimate episode in season 3. And she came back and she was wonderful. She was just fantastic. And then as we shot the episode, we were like, we love McKenna Melvin. Let's write more. So season 4 and season 5, the Morgan Alex relationship became more and more important. And a lot of that was based on the fact that we liked writing for McKenna, and we liked what she did with it, and she was funny and emotional and great. So that's one of those little, and it's not an accident, because I'd like to think that we knew what we were doing all along, but it's one of those things where it's like you sometimes when you're working on a show and you see something really pop, and it's really exciting. It's like Timothy Dalton is the bad guy, is wonderful. Let's bring him back. That's the magic of working in TV, of going, let's not kill that character. We might want him to come back into the show. And that's something that was a lot of fun. So it was certainly an evolution, and it was definitely part evolution, part happy accident, part something that we just wanted to do.
Cool.
Yeah, that was an amazing storyline, and you could tell that the two of them were just there was a chemistry there that people usually think of the romantic on-screen relationships when you say that, but those two had amazing chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, Adam was incredible this year. He had the amazing romantic relationship with Gertrude.
Yes.
Carrie and Moss. Just it was outrageous. And then it's like the father's story has been one of the most poignant things that we've done on the show. In our longer version of the finale, you actually we have more Casey at the end.
Awesome.
We had to trim back his goodbye to the show, considering the length of it. I think going off on the hug was great, but there's even more in the expanded DVD.
Cool. Okay, well, this is another question that I think is going to be answered on the DVD, but it's one that came up a lot, so I decided we ought to ask you directly. Ashley actually submitted this on behalf of a lot of people. Given that Ellie has been a mother hen to Chuck for the entire series, why did she and Awesome just leave all of a sudden while Sarah was still had amnesia? Because we saw her kind of help bring Morgan back. So it kind of feels like there's maybe a scene missing where they talk about why she's not going to help Sarah.
There was an the one thing is that there was an expanded version, like when Sarah and Ellie are in that final moment. There was a longer version, and I'm not quite certain if we included it in not director's cut, but in the expanded version. They talk more about Ellie's future, and and why Ellie's going at this exact moment. And I think that for Chuck, it's like he can't imagine his sister making another choice in her life where she's limiting her opportunities because she needs to mother her brother. That's something that he couldn't let happen. And so Chuck has to, again, going back to the notion of him manning up in those final scenes, is that it's not about spy stuff. It's about him being a good younger brother and a good man and saying, Ellie, your future is in Chicago and this great opportunity, and this is what you need to do. You can't be here to to fix my wings so I can fly again. You have to follow your own dream. I'm a guy. I'm a man now. I'm all grown up. And I think that's the important thing in that moment. And I don't think Chuck would have wanted his sister to stay behind and to, feed him chicken noodle soup until, Sarah returns. That's not that was the Chuck of the first, the first,
right.
Life up until this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, did you guys ever think about having Ellie upload the Intersect?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. There was definitely a moment where we considered, cause Sarah Lancaster, is fantastic and can do, so much more in regard to the action and spy side of the show. So there was certainly a moment, even in season 4 when we were kind of considering, moving Sarah Lancaster, Ellie Bartowski, more into the spy side of the show. Then she got pregnant, and that was threw that off a little bit. And then in season 5, there just wasn't enough time to kind of do that story and to kind of get into that side of the story. So we kept it to just Morgan and Sarah, but there was certainly a point with Sarah Lancaster that, we just wanted to do more. And, I think that, if we had gotten more episodes, that's something we probably would have explored.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Well, looking back at some of the other characters that have run through the show, were there plans for Kristen Krug's character, Hannah, to be more than her 4-episode arc? That question is from Matt Showalter.
No, it was always going to be a short arc on the show. We didn't want to do and she's a spy with Kristen's character. We wanted it to be an emotional, very much on an emotional level, and also a counterbalance to the Shaw character, who was definitely very much strictly tied into the spy world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. JD wants to know, what was the overall atmosphere like when you were shooting the warehouse flashcard scene in Bullet Train? It was pretty intense for us.
It was, that episode was directed by the Buzz Feitchens, who's our DP on the show. Mm-hmm. And he did an amazing job. Usually when we're doing super intense stuff like that, it's very, very relaxed. Right up into the bone when the actors are actually doing the super intense thing. So, Yvonne and Zach, and Yvonne in those action moments, she's amazing. It's like you're talking to Yvonne, and now she's Sarah Walker. Usually I wasn't there on the day when we shot the warehouse scene, but I'm certain it was probably something like that. Angus McFadden, who plays Quinn, also brought an incredible energy to his performance. So it was very much those final couple episodes with him were very much, a very kind of electric, kind of quality.
Yeah. Dan wants to know what's your favorite Lester line that still makes you shake your head and think, I can't believe we got away with that on broadcast TV.
Oh, Lester line, broadcast TV. I love him talking about shugging the tank. It's not outrageous, but I just love him. I haven't shugged the tank in days, but I'm certain there's much better Lester lines that we've done. I think that gefilte fish curry was pretty amazing. And Kristen Niman's episode, the Chuck versus Bo.
Yeah, over and over and over.
Yeah, it was so much fun.
It was. That was a hoot.
Even though Mel didn't like it.
I did. Well, the fish stuff, but
yeah. Pretty gross.
I don't do fish. I just, ugh.
I always think of Rush Hour when I think of that gefilte fish. Ryan D wants to know, did you ever think about introducing us to Morgan's father?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that it was something that we would bring up from time to time. But I don't, of all the big stories that we wanted to explore, Morgan's parents kind of, we loved Morgan as kind of like the extra brother in the Chuck-Ellie relationship. So in some ways, I always kind of imagined that Morgan was pretty much from the get-go hanging out with Chuck a lot when he was a kid. So the more he felt like a brother, the happier we were. And I think that when you brought in the parents, it was always kind of like, it felt like a different thing.
Cool. Well, we're going to move next to some trivia, and we might have to... just for Melanie, might have to skip a few of these. I'm going to start with a lot of people asked, what was Sarah's real last name? Did she ever reveal her full birth name to Chuck?
She never revealed it to Chuck in the show.
Right.
She did say, but if your question is, am I going to reveal the name now? The answer is no. But no, she never, truly reveals it in the show. The only thing that, like, the whole name thing became such kind of a hot potato of sorts, especially when we came up with the Sam name, that it became that there's a moment in the Sarah versus the baby episode where she's talking to the little girl that her mom adopted, that she saved from Budapest. Mm-hmm. And she's talking to Molly, and she's talking about her dog and how she had a dog when she was a kid. And I really desperately wanted Sarah to say, and the dog's name was Sam.
Oh, you should have done it!
We totally shot it too. But it seemed to be overly confusing, and Lauren LaFranco and I were, she yelled at me about it, but that was my like, I don't care about the name. It was just something that the dog, it was the dog's name, but that was, in the end we said, it was already a long episode, so we kind of pruned it back.
Uh-huh. Cool. And now Larry asks, tied to that, why did Sarah tell Shaw her real name?
But it was the dog's name. She wasn't really telling him the real name.
Right?
There you go. I put it all together for you. Listen, in that moment where Sarah tells Shaw, that going back to season 3, so everybody put on their season 3 caps for a second. Kind of get yourself, back in the season 3 mood. She was, this is a moment where Sarah was wounded. She was going to Shaw because the safe harbor that was Chuck Bartowski wasn't there anymore. He had become a spy. And for her, the person she could talk to was the person who was a spy, and the person, was Shaw. And that was, she was vulnerable at that moment. And, that's why she confided in Shaw.
Cool.
But it may not have been her real name, is what you're telling us?
It was the dog's
name. and Rebecca asks something that we were all surmising about. Stephen J. Bartowski was killed, and there was a direct reference made to the fact that there was a regeneration chamber right next door. And so she asks, is Orion still alive, and were there plans to bring him back if the show continued and Scott Bakula's schedule allowed it?
I would totally. We did bring Scott back for a flashback, but I think that for me and Josh, we 1,000 times in the writers' room. That's not 1,000 times. Many times in the writers' room, we came up with cool ways to bring Stephen J. back to life. That was certainly something that we mulled from time to time. And every time, it was always like, it's so much more important that he's actually dead. That this is a character that is a real moment, that when he dies in his son's arms, that's a real moment. That really happened, and that we weren't going to take that apart by simply bringing him back to life and saying, oh, there, aren't we clever? I think it kind of goes through the same thing with Sarah's memory. If we had merely snapped our fingers and Sarah had all her memories back, then it would have been, I think those 3 episodes would have been, it would have felt like a wank. And I think that's we definitely didn't want to do, and that's why Stephen J. is, dies in his son's arms with Ellie watching from afar.
Well, then it later drives Ellie in the Shaw arc.
Yeah, I know. It's like, well, we also, as we worked on Peter Lauer and directed the episode 7, the Christmas suit, the Santa suit, and written by A.K. Schumann. And we knew it's like as we worked on those final moments that it would be Ellie, that would take Shaw out. That was awesome. Was a necessary moment, and that was something seasons in the making for her. And I'm very happy we were able to do that.
Yeah, I totally dug that she was the one that got to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, unfortunately, we're going to have to miss some of these questions because we do have to move on. And Mel, do you want to take the DVDs?
Yes, I do. All right. You've already talked a little bit about what we're going to get in the finale. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more, the extended finale on the DVD?
On the extended version of the finale, there's a couple of things that are kind of that are quite interesting. We have I think the biggest one is definitely the extended version of the Casey goodbye. Mm-hmm. The Casey farewell was something that was certainly the hardest thing to cut from the episode, and it's a really kind of sweet moment. So I think that I think fans will dig that. There's also more of just small bits and pieces throughout the episode. The final Jeff and Lester and Big Mike scene has a little bit more, and Mark Christopher Lawrence, who only has one scene in that final episode, was really hilarious. But we had to trim him back, to make time for NBC, even though we got an extra minute. But he's fantastic, and we have a couple extra lines from Mark. Then also on the date sequence, when we're in Germany, we have a little bit more action during our dance sequence. Mm-hmm. And then we have an extended version of the El Compadre scene, which we shot at El Compadre. It was the Chuck and Sarah's first date. Mm-hmm. From the pilot, we have an extended version of that scene where Sarah kind of goes on and elaborates a little bit more about her feelings in regard to Chuck and the memories that she's lost. I think that's all that stuff is really cool and neat, and just further expands on like what's happening with the characters. It's there's there was something we couldn't fit in. Oh, or maybe we did. Just tell you, that Morgan tries to get Sarah to remember by putting together a montage for her. Kind of Morgan montage. And that was also something that was like everybody was so good in the finale that it was just hard to make those tough decisions. And each episode is like that. You're going to be losing stuff when they break into. We won't have this, but when they broke into the DARPA facility in the penultimate episode, there was a running joke where there was actually an iPhone 6 or something like that Morgan steals, and he's like playing with all the abilities on it, and it floats and levitates, and there's all this cool stuff. So we were always losing little bits and pieces like that.
Yeah. I know that there's supposed to be commentary on the season 5 DVDs. Was that recorded before the finale aired or after?
Right before it aired, I think. Okay. We recorded it, and it'll be Zach, Josh Gomez, Josh Schwartz, and myself for the final 2 episodes.
Wow.
Awesome. Oh, that's going to be so cool. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then there's been some rumors about the complete series Blu-ray set. I haven't been able to get them confirmed from Warner Brothers yet, but I think we're all expecting there to be one eventually. Do you know if there are any plans for anything either in that set or in the individual sets with like collector's items or anything like that? Some people were asking about.
I know they talked about it. I don't know. I don't have any more details in regard to like a complete series set. But Warner Brothers Home Video has always been a big fan of the show. You can see from the crazy extras that they've included. There's also we have some amazing extras that were shot by the team at Warner Brothers Home Video and put together by them. And there's an amazing kind of farewell to the fans from the Chuck cast that we shot during the final episode. And it's incredibly moving, and I think that I think that you guys are going to get a real kick out of it.
Are we going to cry?
I think there's going to be some tears. As you can see, when we worked on the finale, we were a mess.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of emotion. Everyone was a mess, and there was a lot of crying as people were typing in the computers. So, but it was still a great time. So I think you'll get a feel for what that was like.
Cool. Very cool.
Chris, a lot of fans are asking about merchandise. What can you tell us about what kind of merchandise we can expect to come out from, like, I don't know, the orange outfit or trading cards?
Action figures.
How about the chart, the flow chart that Chuck had?
You mean the spy chart with all the Fulcrum stuff behind it?
Yes.
It's funny. I'm in my office right now, and it's somewhere in here, and I can't. I have all my stuff. It's a big mess, but it's somewhere here in this office right now. But I don't know if we I know it was available online, but I don't know. The original one is still actually pinned behind the Tron poster.
Wow.
I think that the NBC store in New York actually has quite a bit of Chuck stuff. And my favorite, I think that they've been working on T-shirts and stuff like that. I think that's really fun. My favorite bit of merchandise still is there's a T-shirt with the large Mark pig, and it's a cartoon version. It says, "I'm buying whatever he's selling," and I think that's my favorite thing ever. The fact that we had a pig fly down a air shaft with a fireball behind it was certainly one of the craziest things we've ever done.
Wow. We're going to move on to the All About Chris section.
No!
Well, we already know you're a romantic, so
yeah,
there you go.
Can skip over that part.
Yeah. Richard asks, about half of the Chuck cast and crew are on Twitter and love to tweet. Why are you in the half who doesn't?
Well, that's a very good question. I always get nervous when it comes to tweeting and whatnot, and Facebook and technology as a whole, which is kind of funny coming from a guy who wrote a show about a geek. I would say this, I'm still getting used to email. I guess I just have a degree of anxiety when it comes to so who's going to read this? It just, goes right out into the world. It's kind of like that's incredible to me. It's like that someone would be interested in those thoughts. But, I do enjoy the people that have fun with it. And Schwartz is great, and Damon Lindelof is great. And, so I don't know, maybe I need to rethink that.
Mm-hmm.
I think you do, Chris.
Yeah. Well, actually, you can do it with a very, very low expectations, like Stan Lee just does one tweet a day, and it's kind of fun.
Mm-hmm.
But Chris T asks, what advice would you give to people who want to work in television? Specifically on production side of things.
Well, if you're interested in the production side of things, I think that you need to be in a place where they're making television. So there's a couple of parts of the country, Los Angeles, New York, there's Canada with Vancouver and Quebec, and, where people are making TV shows. And if you're interested in doing that, television is very much, it's like you get in at the ground floor and you kind of work your way up. And there's a lot of people that we've worked with on the show who have started as PAs and assistants. And most everybody starts that way. Mm-hmm. And, and it's an exciting world with long hours, and it's crazy hard, but it can be incredibly fulfilling too. So, I think that's always a good first step. And, but it is tough. Nobody works harder than, a crew on, a crew on a television show.
Yep. And Matt G just expresses his great thanks for the show, and what he asks, which I'm sure is on everybody's mind, is we want to follow you to your next project. Do you know what the future is going to hold for you that way?
You know what? I'm working, it's like right now I'm working on a couple things, and they're all in that kind of early phase where you don't want to talk about them quite yet because you're afraid that if you talk about them, something will happen,
Mm-hmm.
But I think that working on Chuck was an amazing experience, and I can't wait to do it again on something else. And I think that when the time comes, hopefully I'll be able to tell you guys and get you excited about whatever that new thing is. And I just finished up a feature script with Josh and his company Fake Empire, and he's just finished directing his first movie. So I think that the idea of making a movie is an incredible experience in its own right. So I just want to, right now I'm just kind of like, it's been amazing. For 5 years I've lived and slept, that's stupid. Lived and breathed the Chuck show, and it's been kind of amazing to have a free moment to think about like those crazy grand ideas that just I didn't have time for when we were working on the show. So I can promise only that they're all outrageous. All the ideas are outrageous, and I just hope you guys enjoy them as much as as Chuck. And it's been a pleasure to create something for everybody.
Cool.
We'll be able to follow you easier, Chris, if you let us know on Twitter.
What?
Nice.
Okay, why don't you just send me an email address for everybody, and I'll just send out mass emails.
Dear world, here's Chris Fedak. Yeah. Well, speaking of the future, after the show ended, a lot of fans, I guess, didn't realize that was it. And so there were a lot of questions. How can we get the show on another network? Can we get a season 6? What about a movie? What about webisodes? What about comic books? What about novels? I think somebody asked about a Jeffster tour. I think pretty much it was anything and everything, Chuck. What do you see happening on there? I think it's pretty obvious that a season 6 isn't going to happen, but at the time that we were soliciting questions, they were still really just sure that they could do that, but the fans were.
Because right now, when you work with a cast that's this talented, as well as a writing staff, when you work with a cast that's this talented, as well as a crew that's this talented, they're immediately gobbled up by other television shows and other pilots. And, so we knew pretty early on that, we can't put this team back together again in the same way for a television show. And I think that, there's going to be a lot of interesting, exciting things. I can't wait to see what Zach and Yvonne do next, with Zach's new show and Yvonne making movies, and the rest of the cast going on to do new shows. So it's like, I think that's a great testament to Chuck, is that we had such a great team that everybody's going to go off to do something else, and that's going to be neat to watch those shows. And then when it comes to the Chuck show, you never know. It's like, I think that we love these characters, and you never know what the future holds. And, but I think that for right now, we're all going to take a big Chuck nap, and just let those characters, have their own lives for a little while, and every once in a while think about them and wonder what's happening there.
Yeah.
It's now the domain of our friends in the fan fiction community.
Yes. Oh, you probably shouldn't have said that.
Capable hand. I said capable hand.
I know.
Yeah. And did you want to? I know there have been a lot of questions about possible crowdfunding a movie, but my question actually for you, and you did kind of just answer it about taking a Chuck nap, and I totally get that. Like, everybody wants the Chuck movie now, but just maybe you can share from your perspective, if there was going to be a Chuck movie, what kind of form might that take in terms of when we might see it, in terms of what you might want to do with it?
I couldn't even possibly imagine the complexity and parameters and how it would possibly in theory work. I think that it's such a big, crazy idea that, all I'll say is that, I love the notion of it. I love the idea of our characters having further adventures that we would see on an incredibly large screen, hopefully in 3D. But it's a different business, and it's a different model. And, I'm hard pressed to imagine, just what stars would need to align to actually make that happen. So I for the time being, I don't know how to answer that question.
Cool. Well, I think we have come to our final question, and Mel, you can do the honors.
Okay, this comes from Alex, and he wants to know, what do you think the legacy of Chuck is? What do you think the show will be the most remembered for?
What will be most remembered for? I think it'll be a couple things. I think it'll be most remembered for one, the meta story, the fact that we were a show saved by our fans over and over again. I think that when it comes to incredible fan loyalty, Chuck is right up there with, some of the classics. And I think that's an incredible story that, Chuck was the show with the incredible fans. And I think that that's a testament to everybody who's been a part of the show, from, people who worked on it to the fans themselves. I think the second part of it kind of goes back to what Josh and I wanted to do when we first started working on the show. Is that we wanted to make, in some ways, the coolest show of 1984. And we wanted to someday, like when we were growing up, we watched TV that we loved, and we loved from shows like Chips Patrol to A-Team to Magnum P.I. to Quantum Leap, to even like little known, the shows that people don't even think about anymore. That we love those shows. And in some ways, if we made the show that, 10 years from now or 15 years from now, the kids at college or the young guys who are coming out and making movies or whatever the futuristic version of movies are, that they in some way were influenced by our crazy ode to the shows that we liked. And I think that, that's in some ways I guess our kind of nerd, legacy. It's like, this is a show designed, for the people who loved adventure and comedy and like everything, just all smushed into one, and music all smushed into one. So, I think that would be cool, at some point, if we were able to influence, girls or, young girls and guys who go on to do what we do.
Very, very cool. Well, certainly, I know one part of the legacy for most Chuck fans is buying all the DVDs and rewatching them.
Goodness.
Yeah, because boy, there's such a, just when you think of the journey of all of the characters, I mean, plugging in the pilot and seeing where they all were at the beginning, and then looking at where they ended up at the end. I like every single character, including the Jeff and Lesters, had such a journey through the course of the show.
Absolutely. I mean, that was something that we wanted to do, and it was something we were forced to do. That we knew that we were not long for the we always thought we were going to be canceled, so we pushed our characters and we pushed our story, and we had a cast who could do that.
Cool. Sorry, just answering a little message here. And so, I'm here. Oh, Mel's back. Okay, we lost her for a second on Skype.
No.
So Chris just shared the meaning of the universe. Actually, it was incredible. String theory, like in 23 words, it was unbelievable.
It's I always Daniel Shaw.
I always knew he was smart, but
yeah,
figures I'd miss that.
Yeah. Well, Chris, I just want to personally thank you for, honestly, I mean, this, between you and Josh, I mean, we have lived with these characters and this story for 5 years, and I know for a lot of people, and myself included, it has literally changed our lives. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing to think that a little TV show on could even do that, and yet it has. And we've heard story upon story upon story of people who, I mean, it literally saved relationships. I mean, it brought people back from some really dark places, and really, just thank you.
Well, thank you so much. That's amazing. And speaking on behalf of Josh and myself and everybody who worked on the show, thank you guys for for letting people in and seeing how we make the show. It was an incredible experience for us, and I think that it was so exciting that you were able to interview so many people that usually don't get interviewed. I think you see that we had many secret weapons on this show, and we used all of them. So thank you again, and thank you for all your support. You guys are amazing.
Cool. Well, Chris, we've taken way too much of your time. Thank you so much for taking all this time today, and we will look for the next things you're doing. Make sure you do email us, and we'll get the word out whenever you got a new project coming.
Great. Thank you so much, guys.
Cool.
All right.
Thanks,
Take
Chris.
care, Chris.
Okay.
All right. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
If you're planning on pre-ordering Chuck Season 5 on DVD or Blu-ray, or actually any of the other Chuck DVDs or Blu-rays, what better place to do it than at the podcast site? Just go to chuckpodcast.com, and right at the very top of the site, you see the little pictures of the Chuck DVDs. Click there, and it takes you to Chuckazon, a place where you can get all things Chuck, and the purchases are exactly identical to as if you had purchased them from Amazon.com. So as soon as Chuck is released, you will get your Season 5 shipped to you, and a tiny bit of that purchase will go to help support the podcast, which will help us keep bringing these episodes to you. While you're there, take a look around. There's also DVDs from the cast and crew and other projects that they've been in. There's books that might be of interest to you, like the Chuck comic book. And if you click on the Amazon.com link at the top left of Chuckazon, you can browse Amazon.com's entire site, and everything that you purchase in that same session will actually go to support the podcast. So please think of this. It would help us a lot. Thanks. And so that was our interview with Chris Fedak, and we've gone pretty long, so we're not going to say too much, but I just wanted to say, as I said before, this is our second last podcast. We will be having one more podcast, and that's with AOL critic and favorite fan of the podcast, Mo Ryan, will be with us, and I think that's just a fitting final interview. Mm-hmm. And that will be somewhere in mid-March. And we did say a couple podcasts ago, but I do want to remind you of where you can find us. Absolutely. ChuckPodcast.com will stay up for at least the next 3 years and probably longer. ChuckTV.net is not going anywhere. And we're still around. We're not going to Mars.
Darn it.
And I encourage you to go back if you are planning any rewatches of the show. We've had, I think last count was 163 interviews on the podcast. And so as you go back and rewatch a lot of those interviews, and I think you're going to get a lot of great nuggets from those. You can find them all at chuckpodcast.com. Not all of them are on iTunes. The first few got dropped from iTunes because they only allow us to have 100 episodes on there. So you can get them at chuckpodcast.com or blip.tv/chuckpodcast. And you can always email us, mail@chuckpodcast.com. And on Twitter, you see our Twitter handles on the podcast here visually, but at Gray Jones for me, and at ChuckTV.net for Mel, and at Pearls of Lisdom for Liz.
Right. We're still around, you guys. I get emails every now and then.
Yeah.
Does this email still work? It does. We're still here.
And a real treat. And we haven't actually done this, but we actually talked a little bit with Chris before the podcast, and I asked his permission to include that discussion. We had a little fun discussion about Volkov and about Timothy Dalton and a couple of other things. So we're going to leave you with that, and we want to thank you so much for being with us through the last 5 years or almost. And do join us for the last podcast with Mo Ryan. Make sure you do check out Tim Jones's podcast. Not everybody had a chance to check that one out yet. That was our previous one. But thanks for staying with us so long and supporting us in every way.
And thank you for all of your great questions for Chris.
Yes.
I mean, we could have had a 5-hour podcast if we had the time.
An 8-hour podcast.
I mean, you guys had some really good questions. I hope we got a pretty good survey of what you wanted to know. Yeah. But I just encourage you to keep an eye on ChuckTV.net, because we will, of course, as soon as he can say what he's working on, we'll be trumpeting that for you guys to check out too. So, and of course, again, thanks to Chris for taking the time to chat with us.
Cool. So, until next time, see ya.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
How's everybody doing? Everybody doing fine?
Doing great.
Yeah.
Well, fantastic.
I'm sure you can relate to, Chuck was incredibly fun, but in a lot of ways we all kind of need a break too.
Yeah.
It's nice to have a break.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And think about the next thing. I think that it was the best ride in the world. I had the best job, and it's nice to feel like it's done. And I think that I think that it's great. It's great. We were all so happy.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm excited to be back with William Shatner. That's always cool.
Well, that's the coolest thing in the world, man. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I know. It's so. I'm sure you can relate with the cool guest stars you had.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just as much as you're in the industry, just working with guys that you watched on TV as a kid, it's so cool.
So old.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like the you guys are tough. The Shatner is amazing. There's always like one of the kind of legends that we make. Great to work with. I think that for us, Timothy Dalton and Scott Bakula were certainly we had to kind of check a little bit of that kid at the door so you could be a professional. But, it was
What, you didn't jump up and down and squeal? Come on, Chris, be honest.
You have to wait till he leaves. You have to wait until he leaves the room. You got to be cool. You got to play cool. No, Dalton was fantastic. I mean, when Timothy came in for the first time, Josh and I were ecstatic. This was Timothy Dalton coming in, and he did not disappoint. I mean, he had all the energy and charisma of Bond in that meeting. When he left, we were flabbergasted with how cool he still was.
Yeah.
Okay, I got to ask, did you guys quiz him on any Bond trivia?
It's funny. We talked about Bond quite a bit. Because in some ways, for Timothy, and I think that it was something that we wanted to stay away from too, is that we didn't want to do Bond, because there was a lot of pitfalls to having Tim come in and work on a spy show because he had done Bond already and he had done it already so well. So for us, we spent a lot of time kind of talking about how the show would be different and how the character of Volkov and Hartley would be different from stuff he had done in the past, and that was a big thing that was very important to him. Mm-hmm. And I think that from the get-go, from the very earliest conversations, we were kind of focusing in on doing something different.
Wow. Well, and I think that really worked.
Yeah, it did.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
The what was it? The tiny weapon standoff and
That's so funny.
Episode 7 of that season, the introduction of Timothy's character and the Volkov reveal and the tiny weapon standoff in the jet plane is one of my favorite episodes. It's one of my favorite episodes, looking at the entire run of the season. And I remember Josh and I were looking at the dailies, and Barbara was cutting that episode. And we went in there because we were kind of like, this is it. Let's go see how this is turning out. Because we had seen, Timothy's take on, the more affable, the Hartley side of the character, and we wanted to see what the reveal would be, what it would be like when he turned. So the moment Barbara, who also I mistake for Volkov on a regular basis, when the moment Barbara had the cut ready, we were like, just that scene, tell us. We want to come in and just take a look at it early. And so he had the scene, and he showed it to us. And I remember when Tim comes out in the Volkov suit, with the gun at his side, and he walks up to Chuck and he smacks him in the head and knocks him out. And it was literally like we screamed with joy. It was so cool. Like, there he is. There he is being the bad guy that, we always wanted to do. Because, in the first couple of seasons of the show, we really did, the nefarious, secretive bad guy organizations. Mm-hmm. But we knew at some point we really wanted to do a heavy, a true bad guy. And so Volkov was our big bad.
Very cool.